G'day Internet, welcome back to another video. Now, this is going to be a bit of a quick and nasty one, primarily because the machine you have in front of me, I need to get up and running this weekend because it needs to go on demonstration in a couple of weeks and I'm out of town next weekend. This here is a Microbee, a 128K Premium to be exact, which is kind of the one to have. I don't have huge amounts of time to dig completely into the history of this machine. I intend to do a more in-depth video in the future. But if you want the really short version, started off life as a kit computer. New South Wales Department of Education put out a tender for a standardised computer across New South Wales. Microbee won the tender, turned their kit computer into a production model, which is roughly what you see here. And so on and so forth. It also found uses in both engineering and science, and BMW Australia actually ended up using it for their parts system. Also popped up in a few other countries. There were some exports. Sweden, I believe, got some, and obviously just across the pond in NZ. But for now, that will pretty much do the background of the machine. What I need to do now is to tear this machine apart. It needs a thorough clean and a retro bright because it's an interesting shade of yellow at the moment. But the bulk of this video is actually going to get the disk drive working. Well, it's a project I started on probably a couple of years ago and never got around to finishing it, so it's kind of half done, but essentially it's a Gotek. So no huge amounts of surprises there, but let's dig into it. Right. Here's our mighty Microbee. Oh, okay, it seems I didn't put the screws in it last time. I was in here, go me. Okay, that's the top cover. It comes apart, which is going to make retro brighting that a lot easier. And the bulk of the machine, how is this? I can't even remember how it's held in, to be honest. Doesn't seem to be any screws. How is this held in? Right, I think we need to start by taking the top board off very carefully, which is held in with some header pins here and here. And you've just got to be very careful in lifting this up, because this is not a young machine. Right, we've got an earth strap, which kind of falls apart. And there we go. And it just lifts out. Oh. Okay, the speaker is half attached. I'm just going to break that. And we'll solder that back together properly. That's the main board of a Microbee. Okay, these two pieces I'm now going to give a scrub and we'll put it in for some retro brighting. So with that all kind of doing its thing, the main thing I need to get done this weekend is to get a disk drive working. Well, in this case, it's a Gotek in what is known as the computer in a book, which is kind of a very, what's a good word for it, iconic look for a Microbee is to have this alongside it. Now this is just the cover. I think it's actually just cardboard. It needs a bit of a clean, but I'll worry about that later. This is the bulk of it here. We've got a power supply, and it is an Amtech power supply, pretty much identical to what's in both the Osborne I just did and the TRS-80 Model 3, I think. It needs its reefer caps replaced, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the main thing I need to do is, so this goes in here, and I intend to stick a Gotek in it. So this is one I've just 3D printed. The weird thing about this is it's 9/10 of it is actually pop riveted together. So years ago when I first pulled this apart, I've actually drilled out, well, most of the pop rivets. There's a few that still need, the remnants of them need removing. So that's actually, once it's all done, I am actually going to have to pop rivet it all back together again. But I thought I'd take this opportunity. This is my Gotek bracket for it straight off the printer. Now, I by no means have a fancy printer. I've got like an Ender 3. So if you've ever used anything like that, you know the surface is a bit rough. and I generally try and clean this kind of, at least the front fascia that you can see, up a bit, and give it a coat of paint, which obviously in this case is going to kind of be a satin black. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to quickly run you through what I do, at least, to make this look a bit prettier. Now, everyone's going to have their own way of doing this. I'm not going to say this is the way of doing it. This is simply the way I do it, and I was shown how to do this by a mate of mine, Amelia, who makes like cosplay props and all kinds of stuff using 3D printing. And so this is the way she does it, and so that's the way I've been doing it for the last few years at least. First step is basically a lot of sanding, and that's going to be a theme during this. I have 3 different types of sandpaper. I've got some 400 grit, some 800 grit, which we may or may not use, and some 240. I'm going to start with the 240 to basically knock the bulk of the roughness down. I'll see what it's like after that, and we'll go from there. But the short version is sand it as smooth as you possibly can. I then hit it with some spray putty, let that dry, sand it down, take a judgment of what I think, if it's good enough or not. If it's not, it then gets a sand with, say, some 400, and we kind of wash and rinse, repeat that until I'm happy with the surface. Then it gets a coat of color, and then it gets a coat of clear. So let's get started. I don't know if you can see this in the camera, but as you sand, you'll notice bits start to go light, and that tends to be the smoother surface. So as you can see, we obviously have a bit of a high spot here, and a bit of a low spot here, and that kind of got a bit scratched up for some reason, but that's fine. A bit of a high spot here, and then obviously some lines for the original grain of the 3D print. And it basically just takes time. I usually start by this, what I call flat sanding, and you get to the point where most of it will be good, then I tear a bit off and then kind of attack the bits that are still a bit low. So in the end, I actually ended up busting out a little bit of 120 grit just to knock some of the bigger bits down. Now, it's kind of a balancing act in the sense that on this initial sanding, you're not going to get 100% perfect. That's kind of what the spray putty's for. But obviously, the smoother you can get it, the less screwing around and back and forth you're going to have to do with the spray putty later. So all I do now is, as soon as I can put my hands on it, I tend to give it a spray with some IPA just to get any kind of dust and finger grease and everything off it. And this is now ready for its first coat of spray putty. So while the spray putty's drying, let's take a look at this power supply. Now, I believe it's just held in with, well, let's start by disconnecting the mains connector. There seems to be a nut and 3 plastic clips. So we're going to get this off with just a pair of pliers, please. Say yes. Huzzah! Right, that's all out. What's holding it now? Something else is still holding it. Did that pop again? Got it. And our power supply is out. We just now need to disconnect the 3 plugs from the back of it. Okay, so much like the Osborne, we have a 0.1 UF and 2.01 UF reefers, so they need to come out and get replaced. Well, this is going to be a pain in the ass because every single leg is bent over. Got it. I don't know what condition the pads are in, but hopefully there's enough. I can see one that lifted, maybe two. But that was an argument and a half. All right, new one's in. Okay. I'm not going to say it's the prettiest job I've ever done, but new reefer caps are in. Right, it's back from having the spray putty put down, and it actually looks pretty good. I can see a few marks in there. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to start with some 800 grit and see how I go to see if it's strong enough. And we're going to wet sand it. So I've just got a pump of water here and start sanding again. Okay, that's actually turned out pretty good. Now, this time around when I'm cleaning it, I only use water and some paper towel. I don't use IPA on this because you've got a very high chance of actually damaging the coating. The only thing you really want to do is make sure that it's as perfectly dry, because there's nothing worse than spraying paint and all of a sudden one drip of water decides to pop out from somewhere and completely ruin your day. But this is looking pretty good, and I think we're ready for colour. Right, for this I've gone digging through my drawer of paints and I have Tamiya TS14 Black, which I actually don't know if it's gloss or if it's satin or whatever it is. Now, the way I go about it is I use the colour purely just for that. It's just a colour, and once I've got a nice even coat of colour on the object, that's where I stop. And I essentially use the clear coat, which will go over the top, and we're going to be using a satin clear, to kind of do the heavy lifting when it comes to actual protection. All right, I think we might actually be at the point where we can start putting this thing together. There's my Gotek. This needs to mount in this frame. And if I remember correctly, it needs to sit fairly far forward in it. So this could be a bit of a challenge, but we'll see how we go. Just get a couple of screws started first. Or I'm going to try new screws. Don't like those. What have I got? Actually, let's see how these PC chassis screws go. There we go, that feels like it's actually biting in now. Right, so that's that. And this actually gets pop riveted into here. So let's remove a couple of bits and bobs. This should actually pop rivet into here. Mostly lines up. Pop rivets. Grab a bunch. Work out whatever I did with my pop rivet gun. There it is, underneath the bench. And, okay, let's just get this cable out of the way. This should, oh, I put a scratch in the paint already. We should be able to pop rivet this back together. Ugh, I hate that. I also hate it when the leg of the rivet gets jammed in the gun. Shit. Connectors for the Gotek are now buried under here and I can't get to it. I'm guessing the original drive was longer and you could get to all the cables. And I can't get to these screws of the Gotek to slide it in, plug it in and slide it back out again. I don't want to drill it out again. Right. Let's take our ribbon cable, feed it in, plug it in, and while we're at it, our power cable. And now pop rivet it all back together again. Right. Now it's back together. Let's see if I can touch up that paint somehow. Now, I vaguely remember this whole thing having like a whole other cover on it. Do I still have it? Aha, I do. So this goes, guessing the vent goes near the power supply. So this goes on there like that, and of course there is more pop rivets. There's nothing rattling inside, that's good. And last but not least, the bit that actually makes the computer in a book, the book. This, I believe, if I remember correctly, very tightly drops down into here. I think these rubber feet are primarily to give this metal case some kind of grip against the cardboard outer. And I get it in. There we go. Gotek computer in a book. There is a bit of the silver frame, which I might go and touch up so you can't see it, and I need to touch up where I scratched the paint. Right, everything's back together. Moment of truth. One little tidbit is you can actually power a MicroBee off a power pack. I think the original one was a 12 volt DC unregulated power supply, but anything kind of between 9 and 12 will do with a modern power supply. But most accessories for the MicroBee, like the monitor and in this case the computer in a box, actually provides 12 volt DC out, which plugs into here. So as an example, when I'm about to turn on the disk drive, it actually turns the computer on as well, which is kind of nice. So, turn it on. We have something. Gotek's reading, so it's obviously doing something. And this looks like it's booting. MicroBee color disc controller basic something. And yes, we're into one of the arcade collections, which is kind of cool. Right. I don't think I killed it. And it even went beep, so it means that the speaker that's in there, which I did solder back on, is working fine. Which means I should be able to now play Scavenger, which was always been my favourite game on the MicroBee. It's essentially just a Boulder Dash clone, but in my primary school, so we're talking year 4, 5, 6, something like that, there was one computer set up with a colour monitor and a proper disk drive and everything else. And the game that everyone played was Scavenger. So, let's see how we go. Whoop, shit. Do I have enough jewels to get out? I do. Awesome. Oh yeah, color. The MicroBee actually outputs a digital RGB signal, so basically CGA, but in more colors. And there we go, my MicroBee all up and running again, complete with Gotek. Now, obviously, for something like this, the original disk drive would be nice. The one that came in this was absolutely dead as a doornail, and we're not just talking like heads and belts and rails and stuff like that. There was something seriously wrong and I couldn't fix it, and that was a couple of years ago. I'm not actually sure I know where it is anymore. But it probably goes without saying that here in Australia, for any vintage computer enthusiast, everyone loves the MicroBee because it really is the Australian computer. Now, obviously, I'll go into a deep dive in another video. I've got another MicroBee that needs fixing up. This actually, to be honest, still needs a little bit of work. The keyboards on the MicroBees are infamous for being terrible and unreliable, and this one's got at least a couple of keys that barely work, so that's a future project. But for now, it's good enough to put out on display and demonstrate for what I need for a big event that's coming up at work. So in that regard, I'm more than happy. Now, if you remember back a while ago, I actually auctioned off a MicroBee. It was a Prem 128, although it had all the modern upgrades and everything in it, for the firefighters and the bushfires here in Australia. When was it? 2 years ago? 3? I don't know. Everything's a bit of a blur at the moment. Anyway, so what that leads me to is I do have to give out a shout out to Alan Lawton. So when I sold this, he actually pulled this particular machine out of his collection and donated it to me as a thank you for selling mine. Mine's actually now in a very good home. I think it was Henry who bought it, and he's always wanted one. So yeah, it all kind of worked out in the end. And something that may actually come up in a future video is Ewan from Microbee. I think he's doing another run of those upgrade top boards, and I believe he may still have some keyboard kits, repair kits in stock. So that's definitely coming up. The keyboard bit, at least. The other bit, I'm not sure yet. But for now, that will pretty much do it. If you liked the video, click like, subscribe, all the usual YouTubey stuff. As always, a big thank you to my Patreons who are scrolling up the screen now, who help make projects like this possible. And if you'd like to help support the channel, there is a link in the description. But until then, I'll see you in the next one.